The city ship Fire Calyx had a superstition about darkness, which is to say, it had a maintenance schedule no one respected until the lights flickered, which is to say, it had a budget problem shaped like a myth. When the central heliostat stuttered during peak passage above a blue dwarf, the council's local liaison blamed statistical weather. The engineers blamed procurement. The pilgrims blamed an old god of voids that had never been fashionable but always worked on short notice. Sarek 10, auditor of Lumen Tithes, did not blame anyone. Sarek tabulated. The page said, redundancy lost, duty cycles overdue, and an anomaly in the beacon's handoff algorithm that read like a polite cough. The cough became a choke. Banners dimmed in corridors, engineered to never know night. Holoscript bled from gold to a tired gray. Somewhere a school of children learned that silence can hum if it is full of engines trying not to fail. We need a custodian, said the liaison, as if that were a spell. What arrived was a human with a toolbox that clicked like a choir of seasoned sarcasm. Mara Chun wore the expression of someone who had unfriended catastrophe so many times that catastrophe now arrived with cookies. The patch on her sleeve read, Lightward Guild, non-voting affiliate. The footnote non-voting felt important in exactly the wrong way. Humans are not authorized to alter core council assets, the liaison recited, hands folded into policy. Mara propped the toolbox like a pew and smiled in the way that suggested she had already written the apology and filed it under later. Sarek watched the human stand at the heliostat's throat, listening to metal the way Calyx elders listen to meteor weather. You filed us as liability, Mara said, not to accuse, but to get the math right. Then you hired a janitor when the chandelier fell. We filed your species under variance risk, Sarek corrected, because auditors get hives around imprecision, unpredictable response curves under political pressure. Good thing I'm not political, Mara said, which was both untrue and useful. She opened the heliostat's panel and found a prayer someone had taped a child's drawing inside, a son with too many arms. You left your calamity a snack, she said softly. The liaison bristled. Will this require downtime? It will require humility, Mara said. Downtime is cheaper. She reached for a manual handoff crank that existed because humans write standards like paranoid gardeners. Always an extra valve, always a second way home. Why does a heliostat have a crank? Sarek asked, genuinely curious and faintly appalled. Because power is a fair weather friend, Mara said. And because we trained with candles. She set the crank, engaged the brake, and sang a number under her breath. Not a song, not really, but the shape of timing made into air. The lights obeyed not the crank, but the decision that had arrived with it. Slow, steady, then fussed brighter like a child pretending not to like being comforted. The algorithm? Sarek asked. Hungry, Mara said. It learned to skip breakfast. She nodded at the handoff chain. Someone optimized away a heartbeat. It saved milliseconds and stole mornings. Humans, the liaison said to the ceiling, are space orcs with coffee? It was meant to be an insult that could be recalled as a joke if the vote went sideways. Mara wiped her hands on a cloth that smelled like lemon and shop glasses. Sometimes, she said, and sometimes we're custodians who didn't get invited to meetings. She pointed to the maintenance budget. You paid for perfect uptime and got brittle. Pay for recovery. Sarek logged the heresy. Pay for failure on purpose. The thought felt like taking shoes off in a temple and finding the floor warm. When the heliostat settled into honest light, the city ship exhaled in 3 registers. Relief, embarrassment, and the small laugh machinery makes when it remembers its job. Mara closed the panel and taped the drawing back where it had kept the gods busy. Leave it, she said. It tells engineers who they're working for. What do you want for compensation? The liaison asked, already composing a receipt that could be forgiven by someone else. A seat, Mara said, not to talk, to listen to your failure meetings. We don't have those. You do now, Mara said. And Sarek tasted a new entry forming on the ledger. Meetings where people go to be wrong on purpose before the ship is wrong by accident. Variance risk, the liaison muttered, as if naming a dog that kept saving children from wells in a way that violated leash laws. Write it under custody, Sarek told them. Not of power, of mornings. Night on Calyx was a contractual fiction. Lights dimmed by treaty to help the circadian markets, and priests called this mercy budgeting. Still, after the crank, the darkness felt honest, the way a room feels after a fight when someone has swept. Sarek followed Mara through a service corridor lined with the fossils of previous optimizations, redundant pipes capped like regrets, old handrails, a door labeled manual override in a font no one used anymore because it had too much backbone. "You carry too many tools," Sarek said, "not to judge, but to weigh." "Tools are apologies you make in advance," Mara said. "We're good at sorry." She flicked on a small lamp that pretended it would never be needed, and by that pretense, earned the right to always be there. They reached a node called Daybreak, where the heliostat's choices met the beacon's duties, and where, 27 years ago, an engineer had signed their name inside a panel, because sometimes the only monument you get is a scribble in dust. "Your audit will say I violated 3 statutes," Mara said. "It will forget to say I prevented 4 funerals." "My audit will say both," Sarek said, with a humility that made the air take a step back to watch. Mara placed 3 items on the floor: a crank handle, a small printed book smelling of ink and stubbornness, and a pack of high-calorie rations that had taught generations of technicians what disappointment tasted like. "The Dark Run kit," Sarek read. "This is contraband. It's culture," Mara said. "We don't worship failure. We practice it." She tapped the book. "Procedures for when nothing works that still work when nothing else does." Sarek did something unsafe for auditors. They imagined, if the beacon chain failed during a diplomatic convoy, if the heliostat hiccuped over a medical corridor, if the council convened under lighting that could not promise itself, what would survive? The crank, the book, the rations. "Humans are space orcs," the liaison had said, and Sarek tasted the trope with a professional palate. Orcs with fuses. Orcs that label their monsters, and then feed them schedules. "Show me the line you think is your crime," Sarek said. Mara opened the book to a page titled "In Case of Mourning." "Step 1, she read. "Admit it is not mourning." She looked up. Everything else becomes possible after that. They ran a drill in a silent room. Kill power. Hand off to crank. Hold the beat. Bring up the low corridors first where people trip. Enforce the pause where panic pretends to be necessary. In the drill, a child cried. In the drill, someone sang to them while someone else fixed what could be fixed. "Your council banned us from voting," Mara said, when the room's hum grew domestic again. "You wrote the ban like a poem. Beautiful language for an ugly feeling." "We feared your variance," Sarek said. "We feared saying yes and finding out yes has teeth." "We have teeth," Mara allowed. "We use them to strip wire." She sat, not tired so much as done. "Let me sit in your failure meetings. I don't need to speak. I need to hear what you won't say in rooms with banners." "Rooms with banners are allergic to failure," Sarek said, which sounded like treason and felt like breath. "Then we'll meet here," Mara said, "at daybreak. It's where honesty lives." Sarek logged a new practice. Daybreak reviews held at false dawn, attended by custodians, audited by someone who loved numbers more than they loved being right. A tremor touched the deck, the sort that means a ship has remembered a promise it made to physics and is paying the interest. The heliostat compensated without drama. The beacon took its cue, and corridors along the Pilgrim Ring walked out of dusk like they had trained for it. "Tomorrow," Mara said, "someone will demand we remove the crank. It makes the metrics look ugly." "What will you say?" Sarek asked. "That pretty breaks," Mara said. "Ugly keeps." They left Daybreak with the book still open on the floor, a deliberate rudeness to bureaucracy that in another context would read as reverence. A maintenance bot paused, scanned the page, and updated its troubleshooting tree with a step called "Admit it is not mourning." By the time the city ship declared contractual night, people were already telling the story the way people do when they survived something they didn't realize was trying to eat them. In their versions, the human had been 7 meters tall, or very small, or 2 women, and a robot or a collective noun. Sarek made a note to let the myth enlarge itself so the truth could move inside it with room to work. In the morning that wasn't a morning yet, the council liaison drafted a reprimand and attached a commendation to it by accident, which is one way to tell the truth when your job is to pretend not to. Sarek filed a report under an old code that had survived budget cuts by being boring, recommended practice revision. It read, "Keep the crank, teach the book, pay for recovery." Invite variants to the meeting and give it coffee. Mara slept on the floor under daybreak with a toolbox as a pillow, which is a prayer custodians say when they have run out of gods that return calls. The lights dimmed around her, as if the ship were tucking her in with a curtain made of promises kept. Auditor Sarek 10 did not dream often. Numbers made poor actors, and regulations had no third act. That night, contractual night, the one lit by mercy budgeting rather than stars, Sarek dreamed of a crank. It turned without hands and still managed to accuse. The accusation was simple. You bought perfection and forgot recovery. By dawn false, Sarek walked back to daybreak with a manual that called itself a book, as if ashamed of being right so often. Pages had the texture of stubbornness. The title of the first section was an insult to optimism in case of mourning. Step 1. Admit it is not mourning. He read it aloud and felt the room agree to be smaller, so thinking could be bigger. Sarek ran the drill alone. Kill power. Let the hum die without panicking with it. Crank handoff. Count to 8 like a prayer that pays its own tithe. Bring the low corridors first. Enforce the pause. In the stillness, a mind learned which part of fear was useful and which part was theater thrown by glands. The manual had a chapter Sarek could not stop rereading on room temperature and human speech. It said nothing about warmth as comfort. It said warmth as bandwidth. Ears listen better when blood vessels don't hide behind frost. Hands choose better when they know what the floor feels like. The chapter ended with a sentence that would be illegal if written by a politician. We tune rooms so people can be brave without having to be heroes. Variance risk, Sarek murmured to the manual, which had the decency not to answer. The trope about human space orcs with coffee played better as a joke when you didn't have their crank in your hand. The book's margins held grease fingerprints where previous readers had decided to live. A knock. Mara Chun, toolbox under one arm, bread under the other. The bread was the color of compromise and tasted, Sarek suspected, like the opposite of heroism. Brought you a bribe, Mara said, for not turning me in. I'm turning you in, Sarek said, and the turn goes through me. He lifted the bread. Also this, they ate in the way people do when work has been briefly convinced to sit on the floor. You read it, Mara said, nodding at the book. Did it shout? It hummed in a key? I felt in my audit seal, Sarek admitted. You wrote procedures for when dignity needs help. Dignity is bad at math, Mara said. We give it a calculator. She set the toolbox down and opened to a section titled The Day the Algorithm Learns to Skip Breakfast. Whoever optimized your handoff did it for a prize. Prizes are rationed attention wearing a sash. Can you prove intent? Sarek asked out of habit that had once saved a district from burning down just because someone wanted to. Intent is dessert, Mara said. I need lunch. She pointed to a graph that showed how milliseconds had been stolen from mornings across 10 cycles. This is starvation. Slow, pretty, legal. Sarek recorded the offense in a ledger that did not know where to file tenderness. I will need to recommend a reversal, they said. We will buy failure back. And training, Mara added. Dark run standard. It's contraband, Sarek said, testing the word for power. It's inheritance, Mara countered. We didn't invent the dark. We learned to hold it. They ran the drill again, this time with an audience of one maintenance bot and a pilgrim child who had memorized which screws looked like eyes. The child counted with them, offbeat and perfect. When the lights returned, the bot logged an update, prefer human cadence under anomaly. Your council will object, Sarek said, but they said it like weather, not like law. Councils object, Mara said. Ships live. Why do you ask to sit in failure meetings? Sarek asked. No speaking, just listening. Because the people who know how it breaks rarely get to narrate it, Mara said. And because you don't need me in grand chambers. You need me to remember how the handle feels at minute 6. The manual's last chapter had a title that felt like a dare on letting the myth grow. It advised allowing stories to make custodians taller so the truth could move inside them without brushing its elbows. Sarek closed the book as if it had asked to be tucked in. Your kind frighten us, Sarek said finally, which was both the oldest and newest sentence on Calyx. We frighten us, Mara said. So we wrote it down. The council liaison convened an emergency session in a room where banners did most of the talking. Sarek brought the manual anyway, like contraband hope. Representatives of 5 guilds arrived: procurement, liturgy, markets, hull, and optics. Optics entered last with a smile that apologized in 3 directions. Agenda, the liaison intoned. Incident at daybreak. Unauthorized human intervention. Near miss classified as statistical weather. Recommendation. Censure. Replace human contractors with certified vendors. Commission a report on algorithmic integrity. Recommendation. Keep the crank, Sarek said, before their courage could be second-guessed by nerves that liked to pretend they were principles. Heads turned with the velocity usually reserved for fire. Out of order, the liaison said. Out of oxygen, Sarek replied. Breathe with me. They opened the manual, read the first line aloud, admit it is not morning, and invited silence to sit. The room did not like silence until it realized it had been choosing the loud kind. Procurement spoke first. We bought uptime. You bought brittle, Sarek said. Refund impossible. Exchange for resilient. Markets objected. Redundancy depresses margins. Collapse depresses civilizations, Mara said from the doorway. Uninvited in the kind of way everyone pretended to be offended by and then imitated later, liturgy surprised itself. We can bless failure, the priest said. We already do. It's called confession when it fits in mouths and atonement when it needs the hands. Optics raised a hand that had never gripped a crank. We cannot show the public a hand wheel. It photographs as panic. Then photograph a book, Mara said, and a class, and a child counting. Humans are, the liaison began, reaching for the old insult like a life jacket. Custodians, Sarek finished, filed as liability, assigned as the thing that keeps mornings. Hull cleared their throat with the sound ships make when they are being honest by accident. We don't remove safety for elegance, they said. We paint over it. Then paint, Sarek said, but keep the bolt under the paint. Debate learned to walk. It did not run. Running trips. They mapped the failure chain and wrote the pauses where panic would try to insert itself. Procurement discovered a number it liked. Cost of recovery training versus cost of one convoy lost to darkness. Markets found the margin in not paying out liability on preventable funerals. Optics brainstormed names. Resilience Initiative, Continuity Protocols. Dong-keeping then realized naming was less important than not lying about what the thing was. They adjourned to daybreak for a demonstration because rooms with banners are allergic to tools. Mara handed the liaison the crank. You turn, she said, and the liaison, who had never been accused of being mechanical, discovered wrists. The ship hummed ascent. A ping arrived from off-ship. Council Subcommittee on Variance Risk requested an incident report. They also attached a draft motion to restrict humans from touching core assets without a 2-tier approval. 2 tiers? Mara said. Is one of them the dark? Sarek drafted a reply while the ship listened. Approval level 1, the person holding the crank. Approval level 2, the person counting. Optics stared as if they had seen mercy and were trying to decide whether it matched the color palette. This will not play, they warned. It will keep, Sarek said. In the hours after, training slots filled faster than festival seats. The manual acquired annotations in 3 languages. Someone started calling the class morning, even when. The maintenance bot taught other bots to prefer human cadence during anomalies, which created a minor theological dispute in the Liturgy Guild about souls and rhythms that was resolved by bread. That night, Sarek slept, not because the ship was safe, but because the ship was practiced. The dream visited anyway. It showed a council chamber with the lights on and a chair reserved not for a vote, but for a listening. The placard read, Custodian. Upon waking, Sarek filed a recommendation that would make enemies and breakfast, establish failure meetings at every heliostat node, chaired by whoever last held the crank. Minutes to be taken by someone who loves numbers and dislikes applause. Distribution, public. The liaison delivered the censure with a commendation stapled to it by policy and embarrassment. Mara took it like a sandwich and ate the part with calories. Next time, Sarek said at daybreak, I will bring coffee. Make it terrible, Mara said. Tradition. Humans, the liaison said, but this time it didn't sound like a species. It sounded like a job title. Filed as liability, Sarek replied. Assigned as custodian, and for the first time in a long while, Calix believed itself when it said goodnight. Midnight on Calix was a contract line more than a sky, a scheduled dimming that told merchants when to rest and engines when to whisper, which is how Sarek 10 knew the trouble was serious when the beacon corridor pulsed bright enough to make treaties squint. The corridor marked a peace scene between local traffic and the Reth Protectorate's border pickets, a scene that worked because everyone had agreed to pretend the light was a law and not a very polite suggestion, until the handoff jittered and the scene looked like a tear. A pilgrim convoy queued for passage saw the flicker as insult. The Reth Patrol tagged it as probe, and a privateer with more opinions than fuel called 3 friends to come watch the History Channel live. Statistical weather, the liaison said again, because names can be blankets if you don't mind your feet being cold. Starvation in the handoff, Marachan said, because she had been fed a diet of failure and learned to call it by its flavors. Sarek opened the dark run manual to the section engineers dog-eared until the corners learned to stand at attention. Beacon handoff, manual reset, high traffic corridor, adversarial interpretation risk. Reset buys us time, Mara said, strapping the crank into a socket. The corridor designers hid like a guilty conscience. And time buys us kindness if we spend it right. You cannot perform a corridor reset without subcommittee approval, the liaison recited, his voice the exact pitch of an invoice that hopes to be forgiven. Approval level 1, Sarek said, hearing their own line from the day before and deciding to keep it, is the person holding the crank. Approval level 2, Mara said, meeting Sarek's eyes, is the person counting. They killed the automation with the gentle arrogance of people who trusted their wrists and the book. And the corridor's hum fell to a human scale, which is to say it could be held. Begin, Sarek said, and Mara began, not with torque, but with tempo, counting a beat that told the beacon when to breathe out and when to draw the next morning in, which is how you talk to lights that have learned to skip breakfast. The manual insisted on choreography at midnight, low corridors first, pilgrim berths before cargo, then the patrol lanes, and the proud routes whose map names came with embossed consonants. Because pride forgives being served last if it is told it was trusted most. Sarek signaled the Reth Patrol with a tri-sense hail they had stolen from a liturgy rehearsal and bolted to the front of a procedure. Tone at safe attention, light at pause, scent wafer cool enough to mean we see you and mean to keep seeing you. Who is this? The Reth commander demanded, offended by kindness, not accompanied by rank. Custodian, Sarek said, and discovered the word wore them like a uniform. Humans are space orcs with wrenches, the privateer muttered on an open channel, batting for the mean team and hoping for retweets. Tonight, Mara said into the same air, we're the ones who don't let anyone be brave when brave is a bad choice. The beacon's handoff thudded once like a heart that forgot the next step, and Mara caught it with the crank, the way a dancer catches a partner who tripped on pride. And Sarek watched the patrol's targeting gloom, and then dim as intent lowered its voice. Explain the anomaly, the Reth demanded, less sharper now, like a blade remembering soup. An optimization stole mornings, Sarek said, and we are buying them back in 8-count intervals. Is this war? A pilgrim asked on a public channel, because pilgrims narrate danger aloud until it is forced to admit what it is not. This is maintenance with witnesses, Mara said, and the corridor learned to settle, which is the first thing that happens when people are allowed to be useful. They reach step 4 and force the pause where panic pretends to be necessary right as 3 privateers tried to cut ahead on an argument that sounded like urgency and smelled like resale. And Sarek triggered the sanctuary tone, which told greed to go finish its sandwich before it asked for dessert. A Reth gun captain tested the humans with a query that had gotten more civilizations smudged than any weapon ever built. If we choose not to wait, what then? Then we count louder, Mara said, not rising, not threatening, just offering the world a schedule it could survive. The patrol waited because it remembered a grandmother who baked bread and called it strategy, which is the secret of most successful empires that did not call themselves empires. And the privateers waited because the patrol did, and the pilgrims waited because everyone else did. And the corridor became a choir with enough rests to sound like mercy. Hand back to automation on your mark, Sarek said, feeling the ledger page in their pocket grow warm where math confessed it liked being useful to the living. On your count, Mara said, refusing the myth that heroes finish alone and they counted together. 8 like a rope, 8 like a bridge, 8 like someone learning they had a choice besides faster. The light steadied into honest law, which is what happens when enough people agree to pretend with the same rhythm. And the patrol's consumables report breathed a little easier, and the privaters invented a reason to disapprove somewhere else, and the pilgrims told a story as payment. Sarek opened a channel and filed a report out loud, because sometimes you have to be heard doing the paperwork to make courage legal. Manual midnight reset executed to prevent adversarial interpretation escalation. Recommend corridor adoption of dark run cadence for handoffs under traffic stress. Recommend a class called morning even when we'll be disciplined, the liaison said, because thunder likes to arrive after the storm. File the reprimand under breakfast, Mara said. We'll eat the calories. Humans avoid war, the Wrath commander said. Not quite a compliment. We avoid funerals, Mara said. War is just a kind of bad scheduling. The patrol broke off with dignity, which is cheaper than pride if purchased before midnight. And Calix rotated into its contractual morning without finding any names missing. The hearing arrived before the coffee cooled, which is the usual ratio of optics to operations. And this time, the chamber had learned to hang its banners an inch lower in case humility wanted to sit. The motion on the table had 2 faces like a coin. Commend Calix for averting an incident, and censure Calix for authorizing an unauthorized human intervention, which is how a civilization says thank you with a glove on. Optics opened with a chart about panic perception and guardian myths, pointing out that showing a crank on broadcast feeds correlated with a spike in fear verbs that depressed consumer activity in 3 markets, which was true and unhelpful in the way rain is true. Counterchart, Sarek said, and put up a ledger whose axes were funerals avoided versus pride preserved, which made some throats clear and others soften, because numbers make poor actors and excellent mirrors. The Wrath envoy surprised the room by requesting the floor and then keeping their voice under the fire alarm line, saying a sentence that probably cost them a career ladder rung. We prefer midnight resets to morning wars. Humans manipulate, a backbencher said, kicking the space orcs and into the aisle in case any cameras needed a snack. Humans maintain, Mara said, and lifted the manual like a relic from a religion that did not require gods to behave. Why is your solution always a book and a crank? The liaison asked, equal parts exasperation and stage direction for a clip that would play in 13 languages. Because a book can be forked and a crank can be held by anyone, Mara said. That's how you keep power from becoming a hobby that only the rich can afford. The motion to censure failed by an unphotogenic margin, the kind that looks like caution and tastes like growth. And the commendation passed with an amendment that would matter at 3 in the morning. Establish custody corridors routes where manual cadence is recognized as lawful signal equal to automation under stress. Define stress, a legalist asked. Smelling employment? Stress is when people start telling the truth louder than policy, Sarek said, and the room let itself laugh, because laughter is a bridge that doesn't look like one. The Devourers, or whatever department sold outrage at scale this season, pushed a rumor reel that spliced footage of a vice. Wore faces onto the midnight reset and captioned it, humans pull the lever when nobody's looking, which did clicks and did not do mornings. Optics flinched until Liturgy posted a clip of a child counting to 8 under a soft light while a custodian turned a J. Wheel and a patrol waited, and nobody bled, and the caption read, we kept the breath, which did fewer clicks and more cities. Outside the chamber, a vendor sold bread dyed with the corridor's palette amber for negotiate, jade for settle, blue for sanctuary, and the line included a privateer who did not admit to liking metaphors. A council subcommittee floated the inevitable tether, export controls on dark-run manuals, certification regimes that smelled like lucrative skepticism, and a proposal to rename cranks into manual redundancy interfaces, which is how empires apologize to themselves. Keep the ugly names, Mara told Sarek. Pretty breaks. Ugly keeps, Sarek finished, and filed a counter-proposal. Manuals and cadence licensed open by default. Local custodians trained first. Auditors assigned to minutes, not optics. And a requirement that any corridor with a conflict history host failure meetings at midnight once per cycle. Public minutes? Optics winced. Public mornings, Sarek said. The vote took the scenic route, as votes do when they know who they should become, and still want to hear themselves argue. And in the meantime, Calix taught 3 neighboring stations the count, and shipped a crate of cheap cranks with a note that said, "Practice until bored." A ref patrol captain sent a private message to Sarek humans, "Frighten us less when we can hear them breathe," and attached a small recording of a crew counting together over engine noise, which is what diplomacy sounds like when it works. Mara walked the corridor at contractual dawn, nodding to pilgrims and privaters and professionals in suits that looked allergic to scuffs. And if she stood a little taller, it was because myths need room, not because she liked ceilings. "Filed as liability," the liaison muttered at her retreating back, unable to quit the nickname that had become a thesis. "Assigned as custodian," Sarek said, and this time the word did not need a vote to pass. They posted the manual in the registry with all the grease on it, annotated in 3 languages and 1 child's handwriting. And the first public comment that mattered was not a compliment. It was a correction. Add step 0, tell someone. By evening, custody corridor signs had been printed not as warnings, but as invitations. "Please breathe here at midnight," which is an ugly sentence that keeps. That night Sarek slept, which is not peace and not victory, but the human ending that empires learn to crave when they discover how expensive triumph tastes in the morning. In the dark that was not dark, but contractual, the beacon handoff counted 8, like someone making tea for a guest who did not yet know they were staying the night. And the corridor kept the breath that wars try to steal, which is maintenance with witnesses, and the only kind anyone remembers with gratitude. By morning cycle, the corridor reset had already molted into 3 incompatible truths. In the markets, it was a heroic scandal humans had seized control with a medieval wheel, which played well for those who sold volatility, disguised as commentary. In liturgy feeds, it was a parable humility with a handle. In privateer circles, it was a missed opportunity, no war dividend, no salvage, just breakfast. Optics convened a panel and called it a conversation, which is what you name a storm when you sell umbrellas. The banner read, "Automation Reliance versus Manual Redundancy," a title that managed to insult both gods and janitors. A pundit opened with the classic, "Humans are space orcs who break in through the maintenance hatch." The laugh landed the way a tool falls, loud and useful to nobody. Sarek 10 did not attend. They were busy rewriting incident forms to accept the sentence. The crank turned, because law would not, and systems should not be asked to carry shame. In the margin they wrote, "Teach the forms to blush less." Mara Chun did attend, late and in a jacket she had never convinced to obey fashion. She brought a fuse box. In the middle of the panel's 3rd slide, color-coded, timid, allergic to nouns, she set the box on the table and opened it. Wires lived inside with the confidence of maps. Labels spoke like honest rumors. "Is this theater?" A pundit sniffed, sifting for the clip that would feed their channel. "It's a